Denis Davidov was a bold Russian warrior, poet, and rebel, a true adventurer who lived for battle and storytelling. He led daring guerrilla raids against Napoleon, changing Russia's military tactics forever. His poetry was wild and full of life, earning praise from great writers like Pushkin. Though his writings were censored, his legacy endured. This memoir, now fully translated into English for the first time, brings his thrilling first-hand stories to life. His battlefield victories, his fearless tactics, and his role in the Napoleonic Wars, a forgotten hero finally rediscovered. These are his words. Let's begin. The Battle of Eylau has almost receded from contemporary memory after the storm of the Battle of Borodino, and because many now feel that it was not an equally significant event. For a Russian, the issue that was debated by force of arms at Borodino was nobler, more involving, and more passionate than the contest at Eylau, because what was at stake was Russia's very survival. The object of dispute at Eylau was on quite a different level. True, it proved a bloody prelude to Napoleon's invasion of Russia, but no one could have foreseen this. It appeared rather as a contest of military prestige by both armies, in the spirit, say, of card players fighting it out with their wallets still crammed, not obliged to wager their last morsel of bread, or contemplate shooting themselves through the head in the event they lost. It is not really fair to compare the two battles on the basis of the number of contestants or casualties. This is because at Eylau, different weapons and fighting methods prevailed. At the Battle of Borodino, the main weapon was firepower. At Eylau, it was hand-to-hand fighting that took front stage. Bayonet and sword held sway, drinking their fill of blood. No other battle had witnessed clashes of infantry and cavalry and exchanges of musket fire on such a scale, and cannon bombardment merely played a supporting role here. As in other battles, the guns produced more noise than destruction and made a greater impression on the minds and morale of the troops, speeding up the destruction of the enemy by other means. I was only about 20 years old, full of verve, looking forward to any kind of adventure, and eager to confront every sort of danger. I must have been immune to the rain of cannonballs that hummed overhead, crashed around me, and plowed through the ranks by my side, or the hail of grenades that exploded above my head and under my feet. It was a vast hurricane of death that seemed to smash and erase from the face of the earth everything in its path, and it continued from midday on 26th January until 1 o'clock in the early morning of 27th January 1807. Certainly, firepower is ineffectual in comparison with hand-to-hand fighting, where blows are not wasted, always find their mark, and do not require careful aim, whereas gunfire involves uncertainty and guesswork. The disposition of our army, comprising 70,000 to 80,000 men, was as follows. The right flank was anchored to the main Königsberg highway near the village of Schloditten, extending towards the town of Eylau. Half a mile or so short of its walls, it made an angle so that the left flank lay adjacent to Klein Sausgarten. The village of Serpalten, just before Sausgarten, was occupied by a weak detachment under Major General Bagovut. 5 infantry divisions, the 2nd, 3rd, 5th, 7th, and 8th, were arranged in 2 lines. 2 battalions of each regiment were deployed frontally, and the 3rd behind them in a column. With them were arrayed over 200 cannons. The reserve, consisting of the 4th and 15th divisions, was drawn up in 2 dense columns and had 50 pieces of horse-drawn artillery. At sunrise, it was moved closer towards the center of the army. The cavalry was divided into 3 sections and placed on the flanks and in the center, where there were no more than 28 squadrons. The Cossack regiments were positioned on the approaches to both flanks. Independently of the artillery, which was deployed along the line and kept with the reserve, the first battery of 40 heavy pieces and 20 light pieces was at first stationed on the right flank of the army, next to the Königsberg highway. But when the town was occupied by the enemy, it was moved 700 paces further away from it. The second battery of 70 heavy pieces was positioned almost in the center of the army, about a mile from the city, and the third battery of 40 heavy pieces stood between the center and Sausgarten. All 3 batteries were bolstered by troops of our first line, like bastions protruding from fortifications. The Prussian corps under Lestock, strengthened by the Viborg infantry regiment and numbering 8,000 men, was still quite far off but moving towards Altdorf, that is, our right flank. One of its brigades under General Plotz was to entice Ney towards Kreitzberg and away from the area of decisive events, to prevent him from taking part in the coming battle. Our right flank was commanded by Lieutenant General Tushkov, the center by Lieutenant General Sakin, the left flank by Lieutenant General Osterman Tolstoy, the reserve by Lieutenant General Doktorov, the cavalry by Lieutenant General Golitsyn, and the artillery by Lieutenant General Rezvoy. Bagration, who was the youngest of the generals, had no independent command and was assigned to Dokhturov's reserve. The French army, on the eve of the battle, was disposed as follows. At the approaches to Eylau and inside the town, the infantry division of General Legrand was on the right side, and the infantry brigades under Vivian and Fer, both part of the infantry division under Leval, were on the left. Adjoining the right flank of Vivian's brigade was the infantry division of Saint-Hilaire. All these three divisions were part of the corps commanded by Marshal Soult. To the right of Saint-Hilaire's division was the dragoon division under Milhaud. Behind the town, on either side of the Landsberg road, were the dragoon divisions of Klein and Grouchy. To the left, behind Ferre's infantry brigade, was the cavalry division of the Guard. Further to the left were the light cavalry brigades of Colbert, Guyot, and Bruyère, and the cuirassier division under Hautpoul. The light cavalry brigade of Durosnel was at the very end of the left flank of the entire army, adjacent to the village of Altdorf. Behind Hautpoul's cuirassier, on the road leading from Eylau to the village of Stroben, was the infantry corps of Augereau. Napoleon's Imperial Guard and its own bivouac were situated on the hill between Eylau and Gringhofchen. Davout's infantry corps was located about 20 miles from the main body of the army on the road to Bartenstein, and Ney's infantry corps was some 25 miles away on the road to Zinten. The infantry corps under the command of Bernadotte was several days' march behind the French army. The surrounding area, which was occupied by our positions, was a slightly undulating plain. On the left side, several hills that overlooked the location of our left flank were very dangerous from a strategic point of view. Snow covered the ground, making it difficult to move the artillery, and the various small lakes, frozen and also snow-covered, which were scattered around the field of battle, were very treacherous, as they offered flat surfaces that appeared ideal but, in fact, were quite hazardous when moving artillery pieces. Swamps made the terrain impossible even for infantry. A forest of brambles stretched between the villages of Sausgarten, Kuchiten, and Anklappen. The weather was clear on the whole, although marred by passing snow flurries, with light frost no more than 3 or 4 degrees. In the half-light of early morning, the army rose and prepared their muskets. The campfires were still smoldering where the men had slept, their formations crisscrossing the pristine, snow-covered fields of the coming battle. None of them had yet fired a shot. All that was evident was a ripple of commotion among the lines and columns being summoned to final battle order. The 4th Infantry Division and the Archangel Town Regiment returned to their places as part of the General Army Reserve. Suddenly, it was daylight, and with it, the 60-piece battery of our right flank opened up with a roar. Part of the enemy artillery, which was sheltering behind the first buildings of the town, emerged from cover and answered the challenge. Napoleon saw with his own eyes that it was no longer a matter of a fight with the rearguard alone, as he had first thought, but with our whole army. Surely, at that moment, the great commander must have reproached himself for allowing the corps of Ney and Davout to be removed to such a distance from the main army, and cursed the fact that fate had left him without Bernadotte's corps on such a decisive day. Staff officers were immediately rushed to Davout and Ney with orders to hurry to Eylau. In the meantime, a heavy cannonade roared around the town, and the main French forces began to redeploy. The light cavalry brigades of Durosnel, Bruyère, Guyot, and Colbert remained to the left of Eylau. The left flank of Laval's infantry division, pooling together all 3 brigades, was drawn up alongside these light cavalry brigades, and its right flank abutted the town. The Legrand infantry division moved forward from there and connected with Laval's right flank. Augereau's corps formed 2 lines. Desjardins' division was in front and Houdelet's division behind. Their left flanks protected the church at the end of town, where Napoleon remained for the duration of the battle. Behind Augereau was deployed Hautpoul's cuirassier division, alongside the guard infantry stationed on a rise to the rear of the church. Behind Hautpoul was the mounted guard, and to the right, lined up with them, was Grouchy's division of dragoons. Saint-Hilaire, from Soult's corps, adjoined the right flank of Augereau's first line, screening Klein's dragoon division. The cannonade from both sides increased as the French army deployed parallel to ourselves. It became general but seemed more concentrated near the town than elsewhere. This was because, at that point, we were trying to prevent Legrand from attacking our right flank, and the French were attempting to draw our attention away from our left to open up the way for Davout, whose arrival was intended to decide the outcome of the battle. The first bombardment from several hundred guns had already lasted about 3 successive hours, but nothing remarkable had happened, either on the enemy's side or ours. Having received the news of the impending arrival of Davout's corps, which was under orders to move from the Heilsberg Road to the Bartenstein Road, Napoleon instructed the center of his army to move to the right and combine operations with those of Davout. As the armies moved forward, a heavy snowstorm struck, making it impossible to see anything more than a few steps away. Augereau's corps lost its bearings, thus losing contact with Saint-Hilaire's division and all the cavalry, and suddenly appeared, much to their and our surprise, in front of our central battery just as the weather cleared. 70 cannons belched hellfire, and a hail of grapeshot rang against their musket barrels and bit into the live mass of flesh and bone. In an instant, the Moscow Grenadiers and the Schlüsselburg Infantry Regiment, together with General Somov's infantry regiment, charged hungrily at them with lowered bayonets. The French wavered, but, recovering, met bayonet with bayonet and stood their ground. There then ensued an engagement the likes of which had never been seen before. Over 20,000 men from both armies were plunging their three-faced blades into one another. They fell in masses. I was a personal witness to this Homeric slaughter. It came to be described, justly, as the legend of our century, and I have to say in truth that over the course of the 16 campaigns in my service record, and throughout the period of all the Napoleonic campaigns, I have never seen anything to compare with it. For about half an hour, you could not hear a cannon or a musket shot, only the indescribable roar of thousands of brave soldiers as they cut one another to pieces in hand-to-hand combat. Mounds of dead bodies were covered by new mounds. Soldiers were crumbling in their hundreds on top of each other, so that this corner of the battlefield resembled a high parapet of some hastily erected barricade. Then finally, our side got the upper hand. Augereau's corps was crushed and hotly pursued by our infantry and the central cavalry of Prince Golitsyn, who had galloped up to support the foot soldiers. Their fervor reached an incredible pitch. One of our battalions, in the heat of the pursuit, outflanked the enemy position and appeared at the church only 100 paces away from Napoleon himself, as is mentioned in all the French war diaries of that time. It was a critical moment. Napoleon, whose resolve increased in proportion to present dangers, ordered Murat and Bessieres, together with the 3 Hautpoul divisions, Klein, Grouchy, and the Horse Guard, to strike at our troops as they charged forward with shouts of "Hurrah!" This action was essential in order to save even a part of Augereau's corps and to head off our attack. More than 60 squadrons galloped around to the right of the fleeing corps and swept towards us, brandishing their swords. The field resounded to their cries, and the snow, ploughed up by the concerted force of 12,000 riders, swirled up in a tempest. The brilliant Murat, sporting his carnival-style uniform and followed by a large entourage, led the attack with a bare saber and plunged directly into the thick of the battle. Neither musket and cannon fire nor leveled bayonets could stem the deadly tide. The French cavalry smashed its way through the front line of our army, and its impetuous charge reached our second line and the reserve. Here, however, it shattered against the cliff of a stronger will. Our men stood their ground, did not waver, and turned back the awesome tidal wave with concentrated battery and musket fire. The French cavalry, pursued in turn by our horsemen right through our front ranks, which had taken an initial battering but had now recovered and had resumed firing, was soon flowing back even beyond the line that it had occupied at the start of the day. Our cavalry charge was breathtakingly successful and followed through to the hilt. The enemy batteries left on that line were seized by our several squadrons, and the gun crews, together with the carriage wheels, were hacked to pieces after the draft horses and their drivers had galloped away in panic. In this hand-to-hand engagement and the flowing back and forth of the cavalry, Dalman of the Guard, Desjardins of the infantry, and Corbineau all fell on the field of battle. Marshal Augereau himself, along with Division General Heudelet and Brigade General Lochet, were wounded. Several other brigade generals and staff officers, such as Lacouillet, Marois, and Bouvier, shared the same fate. 2 squadrons of horse guard grenadiers, which composed the tail of the retreating enemy cavalry, were intercepted by ours and laid down their lives between the church and the second line. The 14th Regiment of the line lost all its officers, and the 24th of the line had only 5 left alive. Augereau's entire corps, 3 cavalry divisions, and the mounted guard represented mere fragments of their former selves. 6 eagles were captured by us. What a moment of opportunity was now offered for a determined, combined thrust by all our forces against Saint-Hilaire's division, left without support and any hope of assistance. All units surrounding this division had either been destroyed or broken and, more importantly, were too demoralized to come to its aid or possessed no will to fight back. Moreover, it was not quite 11 o'clock in the morning, and therefore, it would be 2 hours before Davout arrived on the battlefield. In order to take advantage of such opportunities, however, it is not enough to have a thorough knowledge of one's craft, to show a determined spirit, or to possess a sharp mind. None of this is of any avail without inspiration, that inexplicable impulse which is as instantaneous as an electric spark, and which is as essential to the poet as it is to the military commander. To Napoleon and Suvorov, inspiration was innate, just as it was to poets such as Pindar and Mirabeau, with their command over words. The propitious moment, which held out so much hope of military advantage, soon vanished. Our troops, in pursuit of the enemy, were forced to return to the main body of the army, from which not a single battalion had been sent forward in support. The enemy, who had been in disarray, recovered, took advantage of this lull to reform, and found new heart. The opposing armies resumed the very positions they had occupied prior to the bloody onslaught, which had so uselessly wasted so many lives. All the amazing feats of bravery, all the selfless examples of heroism displayed by those soldiers whose bodies lay scattered over the disputed battleground, were turned to naught as if it had never happened. The action was now confined to a severe cannonade, which again engulfed the troops on either side and resulted in the slaughter of thousands more, whiling away the time until the French were reinforced by the arrival of the Davout Corps, and we ourselves by that of Lestocq's Prussian Corps. Now came the second phase of the battle. Around 1 o'clock in the afternoon, on the crest of the hills that rose to the left of us and where our left flank was posted, there appeared a few isolated men on horseback. Behind them emerged ranks of cavalry, followed by masses of infantry and artillery. The horizon grew dark and rippled with motion. The hills of Sausgarten, hitherto silent, flashed, belched smoke, and thundered. Davout brought up 40 field pieces, and his troops poured over the battlefield to coincide with the arrival of Saint-Hilaire's division. Reinforced by the cavalry division, Milhaud moved to meet him. To the left of Saint-Hilaire came the cavalry divisions of Klein, Grouchy, and Hautpoul, which had already been mauled in battle and were now arrayed in 3 lines. Further to the left of this cavalry came the remnants of Augereau's corps, in a formation composed of 2 lines. Behind them marched the guard infantry, bringing up the rear of Hautpoul's division. It was followed by the battered guard cavalry. However, the divisions of Legrand and Laval, as well as 4 light cavalry brigades, remained where they were. What a moment of opportunity was now offered for a determined, combined thrust by all our forces against Saint-Hilaire's division, left without support and any hope of assistance. All units surrounding this division had either been destroyed or broken, and more importantly, were too demoralized to come to its aid or possessed no will to fight back. Moreover, it was not quite 11 o'clock in the morning, and therefore it would be 2 hours before Davout arrived on the battlefield. Attention on both sides was now focused on Davout and our left wing. Adjutants galloped along the Altdorf road with orders for Lestocq to hasten his arrival, no longer to reinforce our right flank but to divert through Schmoditten to support our threatened left wing. A section of our cavalry and artillery also moved leftward from the right and the center, as the enemy forced back our left wing under heavy fire from the batteries deployed behind the stone walls of the city. The guns were by now firing along the length of our army from Eylau to Anklappen, and from the woods between Sausgarten, Anklappen, and Kuschitten. The situation did not appear too hopeful. Davout, having pushed back our left flank behind the woods, now occupied the area between Kuschitten and Sausgarten, had deployed an enormous gun battery on the heights of Sausgarten, and was shelling the entire army with the same sweeping enfilade fire that we were experiencing from Eylau. Davout's infantry poured into the village of Kuschitten, as did the troops of Saint-Hilaire, who had captured Anklappen, where Bennigsen had set up headquarters the previous night. And although Count Osterman Tolstoy and Count Palin heroically attempted to fend off the ever-intensifying assault, it was to no avail. Disorder was beginning to grip our troops. The whole field of battle from Kuschitten to Schmoditten was covered with scattered ranks of soldiers that stretched out towards the Königsberg highway, still protected by those of their comrades in arms who had not lost their spirit or discipline and were shedding their blood over every inch of contested ground. The intensified crossfire of the enemy guns plowed through and blew up everything on the battlefield. Pieces of muskets, shreds of gun carriages, helmets, and other headgear were flying all over the place. Everything was cracking and falling apart. Out of the storm of screaming shells and exploding grenades, the heaped corpses, and the collapsing men and horses, surrounded by tumult and confusion and enveloping clouds of smoke, emerged the dominating figure of Bennigsen. To him and from him streamed adjutants, messages, and orders, followed by news and further orders. The activity was incessant and unflagging, yet, for all that, the situation of the army did not improve. Calculation and prudence were the hallmarks of our general's thinking and planning, the logical outcome of a sound, precise mind. But although equal to the task of grappling with minds of a similar type, he was not up to dealing with flashes of genius, sudden events that defy foresight, and touches of inspiration founded upon classic rules. Bennigsen's orders and consequent tactics were all concentrated on systematically resisting the attacks of Davout and Saint-Hilaire, opposing bayonet to bayonet and firearm to firearm, but failing to address any unexpected, unconventional move or to forestall a strike out of the blue against some position deemed in no danger from the enemy. That concludes the third part of the story. Thank you very much for listening. Please like and subscribe if you enjoy this type of content.